FMAX update, and well, as you can probably figure out by now, it did not make it to sick week. We ended up taking the 67 to sick week, which the 67 did okay throughout sick week. It's been having a bit of an issue losing oil pressure. We cut the filter apart on one of the days, and there's just a whole bunch of material in this thing. So there's something coming apart inside of that engine, and well, I don't know what it is. To be fair, that is just a junkyard LB7, so it's not like this is anything special, nothing that I've been through, and to see it coming apart doesn't really surprise me. Same deal on the transmission. The transmission isn't exactly happy. Maybe we loaded a hot tune and we sent it a little too hard. It's okay. Ended up having the generator, all the tools, a welder, just basically anything and everything we needed to be able to help all the racers make it to the end of the event. We did some dually burnouts at KSRs. Turns out with the camper hooked up to the back of this thing, it's got so much weight on the tongue or whatever that it will push through the front tires and it will not do a burnout. But if you take the trailer off, it will do pretty good dually burnouts. Anywho, we got sickest of the sick with it for helping all the folks, which is fantastic and whatnot, but it's not really our goal. Our goal is to go fast and be, well, a problem. And quite frankly, the Ford just, it isn't even done. Once I got back, I put the front clip kind of back together to see what that bumper and that 9-inch valence from Bless would look like. But other than that, it's just sitting here. It still's pretty rough. We've got a whole bunch of parts just sitting in the bed of this thing, waiting to go back together and actually try to figure out what our goal is for this application. The interior of this thing is nowhere close to being done. I mean, the seat's not even bolted down. The shifter isn't bolted down either. And I mean, there's just stuff kind of spread out everywhere. I think the dash has that one bolt in it, and the rest of them, where are the rest of them? Yeah, it's just that one bolt. There's nothing actually in the dash. It's just kind of sitting there. And as you can see, absolutely nothing on this deal is wired. So like, we don't have instruments, we don't have ignition, we don't have nothing sitting on this deal. And then of course, underneath the hood, we basically just have Duramax sitting here. The radiator is literally just loosely held in place with a cable tie right now. This thing has got a good bit of work left to do to it to complete everything. So I've got to figure out all of the wiring on this deal still. We've got to get the plumbing done. Obviously, we have our turbo outlet, our intake, thermostat, all of that jazz. We still have to figure out the intake. So we have the intake up over to here. We'll probably just make a little air box, bringing it over to the side, quick and simple. We've got our triple turbo drain still just sitting out here. And then of course we've got our PCV vent. While we're here, AN fittings, the dumbest thing that I have run into. I do not like AN fittings. They're aluminum. They're not made of anything good. And I'm used to using hydraulic fittings out on the farm. If you get a piece of dirt, a speck of dirt, anything in there, whether it's on the threads, if it's on the seating surface, steel won't seal. Won't seal at all, and it'll leak your fluids everywhere, just causing problems. Don't like AN fittings. And of course, once you try to tighten it with that dirt in there, it deforms the fitting, and the fitting will just never seal again. So, not a fan of the AN lines. We've got a Stealth 67 sitting in the valley, and then we have a stock LML converter behind this thing. So that LML converter isn't going to live. I don't think that LML converter would live even with just a stock drop-in turbo. So I'm lazy though, and because of that, I think we're going to leave that LML converter in there. We're going to see how long that LML converter will live for, and whenever it blows up, I have an FTI one sitting at the house to put into this thing. And of course, once that LML converter goes out, we will swap out to this S500 turbo for the Valley charger, and then we'll add the 2 atmosphere chargers on top of it to make for a very large triple kit to make sure that we are getting all of the air that we can get out of this deal. I don't like filling up nitrous bottles like what all these other guys are doing, so we're just going to go to a really big turbo setup to make up for it. Will it spool? Will it drive? I don't know. But that is what our plan is for right now. This is already all in here. This is started up and ran, so there's no real reason to try to change it right now. I feel like we just need to get this thing running and driving and get a proof of concept to make sure that this is actually going to work. I ended up having some starter issues with this. The starter decided that it didn't want to quit working, so we got ourselves another starter. The starter on this deal is only one of many issues that we have ran into. The other kind of big killing factor to sick week was the fuel tank situation. This is the factory rear tank out of it. This is the tank that I was planning on running. However, as you can see, that is just filled full of rust. And as much as I trust the AirDog fuel system on this deal, I don't really want to risk tearing up an extra G fuel system, because that pump and those injectors are not cheap by any means. And as good of a reason it was give me to upgrade and get a bigger pump and bigger injectors and whatnot, it's not worth scattering it on something as silly as a fuel tank, because then our fuel tank issue would still be a problem even with the new stuff. And then of course the saddle tank, the middle tank, you can see that one's not much better. So that tank's no good, that tank is absolutely no good. And I'd like to be able to keep kind of the factory fitment in the back of this thing. I don't want to run that forest tank. That way it kind of just gives us more space for the transfer case, all the wiring and plumbing and everything else that runs on the driver's side of it. So I don't want to put that forest tank in it. But I figured out that theoretically we can fit a Bronco 30-gallon tank in the back of this thing. So we'll be able to simply get some Bronco straps bolted up into that spot right there, and we'll have a good sized fuel tank to be able to hopefully do all of the events that we want to do with this on a single tank of fuel. Maybe I'm weird, I do not like a fuel cell sitting in the bed of the truck taking up valuable real estate for whatever this whole ordeal can be used for, because you put a fuel cell in the back of this thing and it just takes up space, and you go to throw something in the back of it, you throw a pallet into the back of it, you hit the fuel cell cracks. It's a bad day. I'm not a big fuel cell person. I did go through and wash this thing, and surprisingly it came back pretty good considering all the mold and mildew and everything else that was on it. Like, this fender is pretty minty. The problem though is all of our paint is just peeling off. Our paint is just disappearing, and the problem is once the paint starts coming off like that, rust isn't far behind it. So I need to figure out what we can do about that. The stickers will be able to cover some of the stuff for right now, but stickers are not a permanent solution to the paint issue. However, the paint issue I'm not going to worry about until this thing is running and driving, and we've got some time underneath our belt to make sure that it's worth even keeping this thing around. As you can kind of see, we've basically wrapped up our 05 and up front axle swap. So this thing has got a Super Duty front axle in it, Dana 60, and basically all the original stuff off of a F250. Bolts on pretty good. That seems to be working out for us. Only thing I don't like is, like I'm saying, the height of this thing. And for reference, we all know how big a 5-gallon bucket is, and this thing literally just eats it up. There is so much space with that 5-gallon bucket in there. And to put this into perspective as to how low we got this Dana 60 sitting in the front of this thing, we have got our measuring tool, and as you can see, it comes up a good ways on the fender in the front of this thing, and then in the rear of it. Mind you, I have all of this junk in the bed, but it still is sitting up a good bit taller in the rear on the factory Sterling axle that came in this truck. So all that still is original height, everything else. Only thing that we have done is we have put an adapter in there to go from the from that 6 or 8x6.5 to the 8x170 wheel. And yeah, that is all original height, and that is basically original height, and it's still it sits up so tall. And the sad part is I'm pretty sure we can get a couple inches out of the rear relatively easily. I don't know how much more we can really get out of the front of this truck, just because a solid axle kind of runs into a whole bunch of things. And basically, as y'all can see, our bump stop is sitting right there and our axle sitting right there, so we don't have a whole bunch of playroom as it is already. There's definitely enough to operate the truck with the way that it sits. I don't think we can get any more low out of it without getting into some shenanigans. So I think our solution is going to be to change these tires out. I really like the way that these wheels look on this truck, especially with the solid axle in the front of it. But as you might have already picked up on with the 6.4 bumper and the blessed valence on here, we don't exactly have a whole bunch of room to be able to turn with. So these are a 275 65 20-inch tall tire. I have a set of 275 55 20-inch tall tires, so that'll be a little bit smaller of a tire. We're gonna throw those on and see if that'll clear the valence and everything. And then if those don't work, we'll go to like a 275 40-inch tall tire, and that should work for this entire situation, which will fix the steering issue, and it will also make this truck lower, which is what I'm going after. But there is still a ton of work to do to this thing. We've got to get the radiator all plumbed up, all the cooling stuff done. We've got to get an intake made. We have got to get a charge system made. So we've got our turbo and our intake. And my plan for that is to take one of those radiators and do a water to air. So we've got the radiator, the ice box, and then we've got a 6.7 water to air intercooler. We've got some good HSP boots for this stuff. And that should be able to solve our charge air system for the first iteration of this truck. I don't think that 6.7 intercooler will keep up very good with triples, but for a Stealth 67 sitting in the valley, we should be able to push it to 800 to 1,000 horsepower on that stock intercooler. On a single setup, like I said, that LML converter ain't gonna take it. That converter is gonna give us an issue. And then as you kind of figured out, there's just a ton of other stuff sitting in the bed that we still need to do. We've got the front drive shaft sitting over there. We gotta get that drive shaft shortened up. Issue with that is this Sterling rear end that we have in here right now has got a 355 gear in it, which I really like the 355 option. The problem is that Sterling axle is not gonna live a long life. So my plan is to keep the Dana 60 in the front and put a 10.5 14 bolts in the rear. And with using a Chevy axle and a Ford axle, the only common gear ratio I can find between the two of them is 373s. That Dana 60 has already got a 373 in it, so I would just have to put a 373 into the 14 bolt that we get. So it's not really worth changing that rear axle out to be able to make anything work. Maybe we put 373s into that rear axle, but it's gonna blow up. Also, peep that 1330 F or whatever it is U-joint. That U-joint, the rear axle, none of that's gonna work for what we're doing. We want a 1450, and then that will just get left alone. Dana 60 is plenty for what we're doing. So anywho, there is the update on our beautiful Ford. Shout out to all of our sponsors that have come on board with this deal. FTI coming in clutch with a converter, AirDog with the lift pump on this deal, Hawks Diesel Performance for all of our oddball stuff that we need last minute. Mild to Wild helped us out with Sick Week, making sure that we were able to get the diesel that we needed. Blessed Performance, they helped us out with the valve springs, that awesome valence in the front of this thing. Exergy with the fuel system in it, the high pressure pump, injectors, all that crap. Of course, HSP, they've got us some beautiful traction bars that you don't see on here right now, along with a whole bunch of other baller HSP parts. We got their billet valve cover sitting in there. We've got the billet thermostat crossover. We've got their billet exhaust manifolds, and of course a true 2-inch up pipe that was welded up by the owner. So HSP has done a lot for this build, and I'm kind of upset about the sticker that we've got. It's not that the sticker's bad, but you can kind of see just the quality in the sticker isn't there. I don't know if it's because it was a file issue or what the deal is, but we're gonna have to get some different HSP stickers to make that right.